So I just want to say to all the civil society, please pat yourself on the back because of the great job that you have done. If that is not enough, please take your right hand to the left and the left to the right. And that is a beautiful hug from you to you. Good morning once more again, and warm welcome to today's media briefing. My name is Noko Mashilu, C20 Media and Communication Manager. For those who are joining us online, or rather say those who are visually impaired, I am wearing eyeglasses and I am also wearing black and white dress code. And I describe myself as a cheerful and spirited person, just like sunshine on a cloudy day. This media briefing is officially opened. And so that you know what is the program, I would like to say we have other speakers online. And before I introduce the speakers online, right here in the room, we have our Sherpa for C20, Mabalani Mfundisi. Online, we have our C20 chairperson, Thulani Chifuta. And also, Kriya Skuman on the line, who will take us through a summary in terms of the key issues from the policy briefs. And we're also gonna watch a video from Dr. Zugiswa Nzo. She was supposed to do a speech or give us a presentation, but however, due to technical issues, she will just send us a video. And we will also have questions and answers, whereby you will definitely gonna feel free to ask what you are up to, particularly even those who are online. And after that, if you are looking for one-on-one, feel free. Our Sherpa will definitely take those calls. Without any waste of time, can I kindly call the chairperson of C20, Thulani Chifuta, to give us his speech. Take it away, chairperson. And then he's addressing us online.
Thank you very much, our program director, Mr. Noko. Let me convey my greetings to the leadership of C20, esteemed members of the media, leaders of civil society, ladies and gentlemen. May I just confirm, program director, if all is loud and clear?
All is in order. You may go ahead.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time to join us in this very important media briefing. We have truly come of time to get to this point. Right from the beginning of the presidency of G20 by South Africa, C20 was one of the well-recognized and well-established engagement groups. C20 was established as an engagement group for the broader civil society, which includes various sectors of activism within civil society. To date, we are proud that we have been able to register to the north of 3,000 individual organizations from South Africa, the African continent, Global South, and the rest of the world in terms of the G20 countries that participate in G20. South Africa positioned its G20 as a people-driven G20 process. And indeed, the work that has been done by C20, mobilizing and organizing all structures of civil society to participate in its structures and processes, goes a long way in giving meaning to what it is for South Africa to host a people-driven G20. We spared no effort in establishing highly competent structures that are filled by individuals who have the oomph to pick up on this work. All structures of C20 as required have been established from the apex leadership into the working groups, the steering committee, and ultimately our international advisory committee. Across all those structures, we can make a bold claim that we have highly inclusive and participatory structures where all structures of civil society that may not have even thought that they can have a role to play in G20 have now been given that platform through the C20 engagement activities. Colleagues, at this point, from when we established our structures, we were seized with the primary goal of canvassing policy proposals that will be packaged into influencing the governments of the world that are organized under G20. We can confirm now at this point that from the working groups, which working groups were structured in the leadership that affirms structures of civil society, and so our working groups had three-tier leadership. We had a chairperson from South Africa, we had a facilitator from the African continent, we also had a third person from the rest of the world under the G20 countries. And that was our way of showing a Pan-African approach into the work that we're going to do. And that Pan-African approach was not only limited to the structures as in having the presence of the African civil society organizations, but it was a policy perspective of a Pan-African approach that was self-imposed into all our deliberations. And so all our policy deliberations were inspired and acknowledged the fact that we have in the South African context a national development plan, we have in the African context Agenda 2063, and globally the SDGs. And so all of those combined were the premise from which we inspired our policy proposals. And so our working groups worked tirelessly to produce those policy briefs, which policy briefs were then consolidated into a policy pack. And that policy pack has been summarized into a declaration which has consistent messaging across all those policy instruments that I just highlighted. And now those bring us to a point where we can say, over time, we have been able to influence the government structures and processes because we were invited into various government working groups where we shared our policy proposals. We have participated in government Sherpa meetings where we presented our policy proposals. Even beyond that, we continue to have bilaterals with some of the lead departments and ministries in terms of the policy proposals that emerge from our own working groups. At this point, we are very proud that we actually had a launching meeting that was well attended by civil society organizations, which also had the platform of a policy dialogue session where we were framing our policy proposals, upon which the working groups went on to have other bites on the very same policy proposals. At this point, we have been up to 5, if not 6, iterations of the policy pack. Upon the completion of the work of the working groups. We consolidated a policy pack, which policy pack we opened up to other groupings to have influence in mainstreaming their issues into our pack. That was a show of course for us, in meaning that we do not leave anyone behind. And at this point, we are ready to get into our own summit, which will be attended by all countries of G20 and all civil society organizations that were participating in our working groups. We are ready now to even get to the point where we can go and participate meaningfully into the G20 Social Summit. We are all systems go and ready to host our C20 main summit, which will be taking place in Gauteng province of the Republic of South Africa from the 12th to the 14th of November. And all information on that will be readily available on our media platforms. And when we leave the summit as the highest point, we will just be unveiling our policy pack and the declaration. We will be ready to get into the G20 Social Summit. We are proud that the hosting of the G20 Social Summit is not only a platform where we are invited as passive participants as civil society. It is a process that has been led by the presidency together with DERCO and working side by side with civil society. We have been part of the planning of the logistical preparations towards that G20 Social Summit. We have been party to the co-creation of the agenda of that social summit. We have been party as well of coining some of the policy pillars that should be considered in that social summit. And as the leadership of C20, we will also be addressing that social summit. That social summit will be a buzz with side events that will be showcasing the work of civil society. That has to be noted. Our biggest claim is that the work of C20 must not only end with the Leaders Summit, which we will be influencing, but the outcomes must show that the voice of civil society has been listened to. And when the voice of civil society has been listened to, our is to make a bold and a clarion call that to show that governments of the world have listened to the people's voices, it must be followed by the implementation of legacy projects such that communities in South Africa and elsewhere in the African continent and the global south can begin to relate with G20, not only through declarations, but through programs and projects and campaigns that can be implemented at a community level. And we are glad that we have been able to take the messaging of the G20 presidency up to the level of the United Nations General Assembly, which was held in September, commemorating the 80th anniversary of the United Nations this year, and exposing this work to all the nations of the world. And we believe that we have a voice to take to the platforms of government where people are making a bold and a clarion call that we are ready to raise our hand to be counted as part of the solution, working side by side with government and private sector as social partners. And therefore ours is a clarion call for collective action towards collective prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Civil society is indeed ready. We are now going to call upon Policy and Content Technical Lead in the Office of the Sherpa, Kriya Skuman. Please take it away, Kriya.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good morning to the C20 leadership and broader C20 community. My name is Grace Kuman. I am the social policy and content technical lead. And for now, I will be taking you through some of the highlights when it comes to our policy brief outcomes. One moment. Just sharing my screen. All right. One moment, please. Just trying to share effectively. All right, can everyone see the screen? So what we'll be doing now is going through the content of the 14 working groups and looking at some of the cross-cutting insights as well as the strategic threads that have emerged from these 14 working groups. Just by way to remind ourselves, we know that our 14 working groups are comprised of 6 clusters. These are Cluster 1, Finance, Cluster 2, that deals with governance, Cluster 3, that deals with food and poverty, Cluster 4, that links to transformative imperatives, Cluster 5 on human capital development, and Cluster 6, that is related to just transitions and innovation. And in the next column, you will then see the working groups that make up those respective clusters. Together, these 6 clusters and 14 working groups ultimately culminate in the policy pack. When we are looking at some of the highlighted themes that have emerged from our policy briefs, we decided to organize a session looking into some of the common challenges that have been expressed, as well as offering the solutions that have come forward. Under challenges, we'll be looking at structural inequalities, underfunding and debt, and policy fragmentation. And under solutions, we are looking at debt reparations and financing justice, things around inclusive and green investment, and then a reflection on some of the cross-cutting calls. When it comes to structural inequalities, we found that all of our working groups have identified this as a key challenge. Here, under trade, financial architecture, and sustainable development, debt burdens and unfair trade rules that limit global South agency, together with sanctions that exacerbate development inequality, were identified. Under people-to-people interaction and solidarity, they focused on migrants, refugees, and racialized groups who are blocked from education, credit, and protection systems. Under democratic governance, civic space, and anti-corruption and access to justice, poverty-linked criminalization, democratic backsliding, as well as uneven access to justice and a shrinking civic space as we experience across the globe was foregrounded. Under poverty alleviation and food sustainability, issues of women and youth who were structurally excluded from agricultural value chains was elevated, and further how this constrains access to markets and further exclusion through a lack of digital access. This group also highlighted the disproportionate impact that this has on people with disabilities. Under women and gender equality, the universal gender pay gap was highlighted, together with gender-based violence and unpaid care that is embedded in the global economic system and policy design that continues to disproportionately benefit men. When it comes to cultural diversity, recognition, and embracement, it was recognized that indigenous law and heritage are typically excluded from our legal and economic systems, and this was linked to a legacy of colonialism that has not been addressed. Our working group on sustainable and resilient communities and disaster risk reduction highlights at how low and middle income countries continue to suffer the greatest impacts when it comes to climate disasters, and this is further exacerbated by inadequate infrastructure in these communities. These threaten rural communities and exacerbate disparities among those who already remain underserved. Under tourism, it was identified that there continues to be weak community participation and beneficiation. Our micro, small and medium enterprises, where we also find our women, youth and indigenous people tend to be excluded from finance, market and skills as related to this sector. Under quality education...
Excuse me, Kriya? Kriya, can you kindly be audible? Just raise your voice, please. Kriya?
Attention. We found that
much better
workers, especially African. Apologies, Shepard.
Tell it was her voice was low.
Apologies, Shepard.
Tell her voice was low. Fine.
Yeah. Now we can hear you, but earlier on your voice was very, very, very low. You may go ahead.
Apologies. Okay.
Yeah. Please proceed.
Try again. Lack of participation and representation of informal and precarious workers, and we know this forms a large proportion of the youth that we're talking about in our low and middle income countries, and of course when we're talking about the informal economy, we also know that this disproportionately impacts women. Under equitable health for all, it was recognized that communities remain shut out of health research and development, and traditional medicine continues to be undervalued with financial barriers that hamper access to effective quality health services. Under science, research and innovation, it was recognized that there is a persistent innovation and access gap with resourcing and investment lagging behind. When it comes to digital and inclusive economies, the working group put forward that the current economic system exacerbates structural inequalities and the exclusion of the marginalized. This was framed as critical to address should we want to ensure that the marginalized do not get further left behind as we progress into a digital future and a just one. Under energy just transition, environment and climate sustainability, it was recognized that marginalized groups suffer the most from climate impacts, yet lack representation in just energy transition plans. When it comes to critical minerals, there's a lack of a binding G20 governance framework, which slows down things like local beneficiation and universal access to clean, affordable energy for all. So the last section here under the challenges, we'll be looking at underfunding and debt, where it was recognized that trade financial architecture currently continues to create problems when we're looking at debt servicing constraints, and the low and middle income countries are disproportionately affected here. Again, when we're looking at the repayment rates, we know that Africa pays some of the highest interest. Our climate finance remains loan-based, which hampers the speed at which this is done. And again, as related back to debt, it then also creates challenges around what government will choose. Will you service your debt, or you address health needs, or you address education needs? And the very institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and World Bank have proven through the current governance model that it is not equitable and it lacks global self-representation. So when it comes to some of the issues identified by people-to-people interaction and solidarity, they put forward that marginalized groups lack financial and technical support, and there is not enough investment in minority-led small, medium, and micro enterprises. When it comes to poverty alleviation and food sustainability, there is a challenge when it comes to agricultural support systems that remain underfinanced. Safety nets that exist are patchy and disconnected from market access. And this also leads back to some of the things that have come around when we're talking about disaster reduction and resilience, and the resilience there. And then similarly, when we're looking at digital inclusive economies, having the effective tools to be able to better navigate. Under women and gender equity, we know that unpaid care work goes underfunded, gender-based violence services are under-resourced, and gender-responsive budgeting is lacking. These are universal but further exacerbated in low and middle-income countries. Similarly, when we start to look at sustainable and resilient communities and disaster risk reduction, we know that in our low and middle income countries, we lack infrastructure and liquidity for post-disaster response. Financing for this domain tends to be ad hoc and insufficient. Under quality education for future sustainability, we know that early childhood and inclusive education are underfunded, budget justice remain absent, and debt ultimately impedes sectoral integration. Under equitable health for all, there's advocacy for universal health coverage, which remains under-resourced. Debt creates harmful dependencies. We spoke about this in terms of where it is that the country can actually eventually spend some of its funding. And there's a call here then for global health financing platforms and fiscal justice. Finally, under employment opportunities and retention, it was recognized that civil society organizations remain under-resourced, and the informal economy is not included in our financing strategies. Furthermore, that rural development investment remains lacking. Finally, looking at policy fragmentation, as a closing reflection under the challenges, we've seen that food, health, education, and climate responses that affect the same vulnerable population are siloed. There are weak policy feedback loops. While we talk about evidence-based implementation, lessons from community-led programs rarely inform macro-level governance or fiscal reform debates. Fragmented implementation mechanisms, so there's a lack of cross-sectoral coordination that leads to inefficiencies in delivery, particularly where climate, social protection, and gender policies intersect. Finally, there is the challenge around disconnected financing streams. Climate, finance, debt relief, and social protection budgets often operate in isolation, and this leads to duplication and competition for a limited funding pool. So next we're going to start looking at what needs to be done. Well, our working groups are united. There's a call for establishing a G20 debt workout mechanism. This should include equitable International Monetary Fund and World Bank governance reforms. It should protect domestic policy and respect cultural space. A call to cancel or restructure unsustainable debt, especially debt tied to health and climate emergencies, and this links to fiscal justice demands. It's a call to promote debt for climate and debt for development swaps, so redirect debt payments towards local equitable investment, green infrastructure, education, health, in debt-created finance for public good, replace loan-based systems with grants for health, education, climate, and care. establish reparatory finance mechanisms, propose a global reparations fund, and legal frameworks for corporate and historical redress. Advance fiscal justice as a foundation for equity. Calls here are for progressive taxation, a curb on illicit financial flows, and a UN-led tax convention. When it comes to investments, from the slide you can see the diversity of working groups that have echoed similar principles, which are green, inclusive, and local. So when it comes to climate resilient infrastructure, there's calls for investments in inclusive community-led conservation, flood-proof housing, biodiversity corridors, climate resilient agricultural infrastructure. Under gender responsive services, we want to see gender responsive budgeting in all G20 recovery and climate finance packages, universal childcare, and gender-based violence prevention and response systems. Under public digital infrastructure, with the Working Group 13 has made a proposal of 3% of budget, should include voluntary ID systems, digital literacy intervention, and community data sovereignty. Under health manufacturing, and regional research and development hubs, there's a call for the development of a global health manufacturing financing platform. Under education and skills development, education and our employment working groups have come together to call for aligning our vocational institution, early childhood education, and higher education to labour market needs. Here there is a focus to ensure that there should be access to inclusive technologies. Under community managed funds, we want to see things like cultural heritage, preservation funds, disaster reduction and resilient liquidity buffers, and community health governance. Under Indigenous knowledge and sustainability hubs, there was a call for the promotion of Indigenous knowledge systems, innovation hubs for biodiversity, disaster response, and green jobs. And we've seen this across various working groups. Finally, just looking at some of the cross-cutting calls that you can find when you're looking at all of the working group policy briefs, we see that the justice groups, youth, and people with disabilities are meaningfully empowered to be co-leads as we look at future interventions and solutions. Financing is political. There is no brief that accepts loan-based solutions as sufficient. Financing must be reparative, redistributive, and grant-based. We also found that Indigenous knowledge systems and culture thread strongly across our working groups. There is consistent integration of Indigenous knowledge and cultural systems as valid and necessary parts of development for sustainability and resilience. That will bring an end to my presentation. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Kriya, for the summary of key issues from the policy briefs. Now, we'll have two statements of intent from the D20 and Q20. Earlier on, I mentioned that we will watch a video from Dr. Nzo, but instead, Nicole will do a presentation on behalf of Dr. Nzo, and Dr. Nzo is the second deputy chairperson for C20. So over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Program Director, and send my greetings to the leadership of the C20 and the broader group of the C20. I will be reading the statement from Dr. Zukiswa Nzo for today. So it starts. Statement of intent of persons with disabilities organized under the banner of Disabilities D20. Nothing about us without us. Statement of intent, letter of intent for disability justice at the C20. Dr. Zukiswa Nzo, the second deputy chairperson of the C20 South Africa Apex leadership member. When I wheel into any room, I carry more than my research. I carry the roads that are still not paved, the buildings still without ramps, and the voices of rural women who wake before dawn to chase opportunities that remain just out of reach. I carry history, to our collective history of being spoken about instead of with. It was 1981 when the world, for the first time, called disability a global issue. The United Nations named it the International Year of Disabled Persons. The theme was full of participation and equality. For the first time, governments were told people with disabilities are not patients, we are citizens. Then came the UN Decade of Disability Persons, 1983 to 1992. Policies multiplied, communities were formed, and somewhere in the midst of it, a new movement was born. One that refused to be grateful for the charity or silenced by pity. We call ourselves Disabled Persons Peoples International, and we shout a phrase that has never lost its power: nothing about us without us. That phrase traveled from conference rooms in New York to the dusty towns halls of the global south. People made the movement. It emerged from disabled people owning organizations. Its modern embrace into disability policies remind us of policies without participation repeats After years of advocacy, the world adopted the UNCRPD on the 13th December 2006. Opening for the signature in March 2007 and entering into force on the 3rd of May 2008, a landmark in the human rights that reformed persons from disabilities as rights holders and agents. I recount this history not as detached scholar, but as a Black South African woman, a wheelchair user, an activist, and researcher. I stand here carrying the work of communities who fought for ramps that were never poured, for buses and never lowered their steps, for screens and never spoke. The jobs never materialized, and for the dignity and that were never wavered. In South Africa, our struggle for inclusion was woven into our struggle for freedom. When democracy came, our Constitution of 1996 declared equality for all, and for the first time, disability stood in the law as a human right and not as a medical condition. We crafted frameworks, white papers, and strategic plans. The white paper on the rights of the persons with disability 2016 spoke of the barrier removal, empowerment, and dignity. And yet every time I roll past a staircase without a ramp, I am reminded that the policy is not the same as practice. In my recent research, I traveled between two South Africas, the rural Limpopo of Rudzani, who reads the magnifier before the braille came too late, the urban Gauteng of Tando, who runs a small perfume business from her home selling scents door to door because formal jobs are closed to blind women. I met Lucas, a man who lost sight after finishing school, who still believes that education, not charity, is the key to dignity. And their stories are not just examples, but they are evidence. Evidence that despite decades of good policy, economical empowerment for persons with disabilities remain the exception and not the norm. We are living in a digital age where governments, comments, and even communities are increasingly online. The G20, under South Africa's leadership, has made digital inclusion a national priority. Not inclusion, but inclusion cannot be achieved if it's not accessible. If AI cannot recognize our voices, if digital platforms cannot read our screens, if public data systems are not incorporable, then we are not just left behind, we are locked out. Digital transformation without accessibility is simple in a new form of exclusion wearing a more modern name. Technology must not only be smart, but it must be artificial intelligence, must not only be intelligent, but it must be inclusive. Digital public infrastructure must not only correct, it must empower. This means devices that speak to those who cannot see, websites navigatable by everyone, regardless of their ability, procurement systems that test the accessibility before approval, innovation funds that invest in homegrown accessibility and technologies. Because the question is not whether the future will be digital, the question is whether it will be equitable. My friends, intersectionality is not the theory, it's a daily reality. I stand before you as a Black woman, a wheelchair user, a mother, a scholar, and a South African. These identities don't take turns, they arrive together. When I roll in government buildings, I am reminded that sexism, racism, and ableism often sit in the same table, and they still eat well. Intersectionality means that the policy only sees one of my identities, it will fail all of them. And yet, intersectionality is also where the great possibility lies. When we design for those at the margins, we build systems that work better for everyone. So as we gather under the banner of C20 with the themes of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, I offer this intent. Let us redefine inclusion, not as an afterthought, but as a design principle. Let us fund accessibility as infrastructure and not as charity. Let us measure success not by policy adoption, but by lived access. Let us move from leadership to livelihoods, from pilots to performance. Let us build digital economies that reflect human diversity and not erase it. My personal pledge: when I was younger, I dreamed of a world where ramps were norm, where buses lowered their steps, and schools welcomed every child. Today, I dream of a world where the code itself is inclusive, where digital systems recognize every human voice, where AI does not reproduce our biases, and where innovation means freedom and not exclusion. I speak today not as a statistic, but as a survivor of policy gaps, a witness to reliance and a believer in change. I speak for millions where names never make it to the declaration, for the rural women and children navigating gravel roads with dignity, and for the blind entrepreneurs reinventing independence, for the young graduate waiting for the system to believe his capability. When coming to our stand, share future, the G20 is not just a gathering of economics, it's a gathering of the futures. And if we are honest and the measure of the progress, we will not be the size of our GDPs, but the breadth of our humanity. So let this summit be remembered not only by the words we spoke, but the access we built, the lives we touched, and the barriers we broke. In closing, fellow friends, know this, and note this as my final plea for recognition of the Disability 20, D20, as one of the official engagement groups for the next G20 presidencies. The Disability 20 stands for proof when the persons with disabilities lead, not follow. The conversation, the world becomes fairer, wiser, and more humane. Throughout this 2025 presidency, we have worked tirelessly coordinating across continents, shaping policy submissions, and amplifying lived experience to ensure that disability is no longer a peripheral but central to global governance. Through the D20 collaboration with the C20 and the broader G20 process, we are refining inclusion not as an act of benevolence, but as an act of justice. We are proving that inclusion is not charity, it's governance. Together with the South African G20 governance, we are setting a new global standard, one grounded in solidarity, equality, and sustainability. A standard where accessibility is infrastructure and where leadership by persons with disabilities recognizes an essential in world's collective process. This is the future we claim, a G20 that does not merely speak of equality, but practices it boldly, visibly together, leaving no one behind. Because the promise made in 1981 still echoes. full participation, equality, and dignity. And because the worlds of our movement still stand, nothing about us without us ever again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Now, allow me to call our own poet in the civil society, C20 second Sooth Shepherd from the LGBTQI stakeholders, Rosh Kester. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jay. Good afternoon to everybody in the room and good afternoon to everybody online. I am going to be sharing the letter of intent from the LGBTI community, and it is stated that we want to integrate robust LGBTI submissions into the 2025 C20 policy plan. Your Excellencies and distinguished colleagues, I'm writing in my capacity as a second sous chauffeur of the Civil Society 20 to formally express the intent to fully integrate the comprehensive stakeholder submissions from the LGBTI sector into the 2025 policy plan. These inputs submitted by a wide array of civil society organizations and experts provide an indispensable roadmap for ensuring that the G20's agenda is truly inclusive and leaves no one behind. The contributions received reflect a robust, evidence-based perspective that is simultaneously national, regional, and global in its scope. They articulate the specific challenges and opportunities facing LGBTI persons across G20 nations and the global south, with a particular emphasis on the African continent. This multi-level engagement ensures that the resulting policy recommendations are grounded in local realities while being informed by universal human rights principles. A defining strength of these submissions is the intersectional approach across C20's 14 working groups. The inputs meticulously demonstrate how issues of sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics are not siloed, but are intrinsically linked to the core mandates of each group, from digital transformation and health to education, climate justice, and the global finance. This cross-cutting analysis revealed that LGBTI inclusion is not a standalone issue, but a fundamental prerequisite for achieving the G20's goals in economic stability, sustainable development, and social cohesion. Key cross-cutting issues identified include the critical need for data disaggregation to make LGBTI communities visible in policy planning, the eradication of discriminatory legislation and policy frameworks, particularly colonial-era laws that perpetuate violence and exclusion, ensuring safe and equitable access to essential services including healthcare, education, social protection, and digital spaces. And finally, addressing the target online harm and political scapegoating that uniquely endanger LGBTI individuals and undermine social fabric. Of particular significance are the submissions of the Working Group on Economics, which powerfully urge that financial and trade architecture must be designed to support all individuals and the diverse families they form. The inputs highlight how tax, inheritance, and social benefit laws that privilege one family type actively worsen poverty and lock non-conforming families out of the developmental gains. By advancing four economic policies that support LGBTI enterprises, ensure workplace non-discrimination, and provide targeted entrepreneurial funding, these recommendations chart a clear path toward a better standard of living for those on the margins, directly combating poverty and economic inequality. These submissions are not made in a vacuum. They are firmly supported by existing legislative and policy frameworks, including the International Human Rights Law, the UN Sustainable Developmental Goals, the African Union's Agenda of 2063, and the Maputo Protocol. The contributions expertly leverage these instruments to demonstrate that promoting LGBTI inclusivity is a matter of legal obligation and alignment with established global commitments. Ultimately, these inputs affirm the fundamental principle of LGBTI rights are human rights. The compelling argument that human dignity and safety are non-negotiable precursors to ensure equitable access to economic opportunity, healthcare, education, and sustainable environment. One cannot access a classroom, a clinic, or a marketplace in fear of violence and discrimination. I therefore urge the fullest consideration and integration of these vital contributions into the 2025 C20 policy pack. By doing so, we will send a powerful message that the G20 process is committed to full citizen inclusivity and is dedicated to building a future where every person, without exception, can participate in the benefit from global progress. Sincerely, Roche Kister, second sous Sherpa, Civil Society 20. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sue Shepherd. In a soccer match, you will have a goalkeeper, and you will also have a defender, midfielder. Now, I want to call the striker, C20 Shepherd Mabalani Mfundisi, to give us a declaration. Thank you.
No, thank you, Program Director Nuku, and morning colleagues here in the room and all over following us through technology that connects us from the global north to the global south, the rest of Africa. And Comrade Tulani has already indicated what we have done to arrive at where we are. I prefer to be the utility player of the Messi type. They can't defend, but they can attack, spray the balls, and make people very happy. My part is in two parts. I've got a colleague, because now we're going to publicly unveil this. Everybody has been wanting it, and we have been having it internally. But this is the moment where we let it out for everyone. Our political declaration is read on the 6th of November, and this is a sum total of agreements and disagreements. But we have chosen to focus on what we agree and recognize the things that we don't agree on. In terms of that, we have Roche, who's part of the leadership, and some countries that are in the G20 and outside do not recognize and embrace inclusion even of the language of LGBTQI. It's okay. We recognize that, but we also recognize that we have LGBTQI communities and others that we are all working and working together with, because we must all look at the ball that we have to score and make sure that we indeed do score. So as South Africa ends its presidency at the helm of the G20 since taking charge from December 2024, we are reminded of our shared past, one defined by exploitation, colonialism, and systemic exclusion, but also of our enduring hope in solidarity, equality, and sustainability. The recommendations contained herein reflect the urgent demands and pragmatic solutions of 14 working groups that constitute the C20, rooted in the lived expertise of over 3,000 organizations across the world. They are shaped by feminist, LGBTQI, people who share traditional values, disability, indigenous and youth-led perspectives, and grounded in the realities and communities most affected by inequality, exclusion, and crisis. We also want to indicate that in terms of this, the Russian delegation and others who share the same view to the C20 does not endorse provisions related to the promotion of LGBTQI issues, as these do not reflect its national legal framework and policy positions. I've already outlined that we are our perfect imperfection, and we will have to state all those. Read together with the 14 policy briefs and 2 statements of intent, which have been indicated here, this political declaration or a communique outlines a blueprint for transformative, people-centered, and development rooted in justice, dignity, and planetary care. Civil society voices have insisted that 1. The future is political. 2. Justice delayed is justice denied. This political declaration is a mandate to reform global financial systems, to anchor climate action in justice, to democratize technology and data governance, to protect civic space, and to recognize that without reparative action, sustainability remains a fiction. We have said that the well-being of people and the health of the planet must be at the center of the global economic agenda. This requires infrastructure investment, community-led health pathways, education, and energy initiatives. It rejects extractive models that concentrate wealth and erode local resources, harming communities, degrading ecosystems, and further entrenching inequalities. We call for a new social contract, one that recognizes local and indigenous knowledge systems as strategic, living economic assets. Rooted in centuries of ecological stewardship and innovation, they are not relics of the past but engines of cultural, climate, and economic resilience. The time for incrementalism has passed. The path ahead must be grounded in participation, redistribution, and environmental justice. We present this declaration not just to G20 governments, but to the people of the world as a manifesto for just futures. Let this be the year civil society was simply heard but heeded. Those of you who are in the media, and these are issues for presidents to respond to, but we believe that this G called South Africa is at the right place amongst the other Gs. I will not go further to that. So what are the C20 general recommendations? We have them packaged in 5 areas. The first area is on economic justice and financial reform, wherein we are talking about redesigning of the financial systems for justice and democratic legitimacy. Number 1 around this is to democratize global governance, reform International Monetary Fund and World Bank quota, and voting structures to reflect real economic contributions of the global South. Shift decision-making on sovereign debt, taxation, and investment to UN-led platforms with full civil society and institutionalized G20 debt workout mechanisms linked to sustainable development. The second position we are putting is implement reparative and redistributive financing systems, including global wealth taxes, debt cancellation frameworks, and binding commitments to grant-based climate development finance. Number 3 is on cancel unsustainable debt for low and middle income countries through a new legal multilateral mechanism, including debt to health, debt for education, and debt for climate swaps. Number 4, reform global trade rules and strengthen the decision-making power for developing countries within the WTO. Want restoration and the full and fair functioning of the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, and remove non-tariff and quasi-ecological barriers that undermine global South economic sovereignty. Number 5 is to support the development of equitable regional cooperation platforms, including Greater Eurasian Partnership, to strengthen the infrastructure integration, inclusive investment, and just economic relations in a multipolar world. Number 6 is on to transform unequal gender relations by committing to allocating a meaningful share of national GDP, determined in line with each country's sovereign priorities, to gender equality initiatives, including public services, education, and survivor-centered gender-based violence prevention and response infrastructure. The second area of focus is on food, work, and care economies. In this regard, we want center nutrition, care, and informational economies as foundational to resilience and dignity. It brings us to point number 7. We're calling on guarantee nutrition-linked social protection and scale investment in inclusive climate resilience food systems to co-designed with indigenous and local communities, grounded in agroecology, secure land rights, care systems, and rural value chains. Number 8, recognize and formalize informal economy, ensuring universal labor protections, decent work guarantees, and social protection for all, especially youth, women, people with disabilities, and migrant workers. Number 9 is build resilient health systems by anchoring them in domestic financing for primary health care, expanding and fairly compensating the health workforce, scaling health promotion, and sustaining support for mechanisms like the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. Number 10, uphold sexual and reproductive health and rights as essential to universal health coverage, ensuring access to contraception, safe termination of pregnancy, inclusive HIV services, and comprehensive sexuality education for all, including youth, people with disabilities, and LGBTQI communities in accordance with the internationally agreed human rights frameworks and national legal contexts. We have already indicated that our approach to issues of inclusion have others who feel differently, and we recognize the different approach that they are indicating. The third area is on climate and environmental justice. In here, we want acting with urgency to promote planetary health through equity-driven transition. It brings us to point number 11 we're making, which is commit to a time-bound, equitable transition away from fossil fuel dependency while recognizing varied national context and development needs of fossil fuel-reliant economies. Ensuring that all transition plans are community-defined, gender-just, and centered on workers, women, and indigenous peoples, supported by public financing and international solidarity. Number 12, support the development and international migration frameworks, including through UN and other multilateral platforms that ensure displaced and stateless communities, including those that are affected by war and climate impacts, have direct access to funding and protection. We encourage G20 nations to engage in equitable responsibility sharing mechanisms grounded in humanitarian principles and aligned with international law. Number 13 is on guarantee energy sovereignty through equitable access to clean, affordable energy, establishing binding G20 mineral governance frameworks, and promote inclusive renewable energy models and local beneficiation that ensures meaningful and community participation and benefit sharing. Number 14, resource disaster resilience through nature-based systems. Here, one scale early warning systems, climate adaptive infrastructure and ecosystem restoration that guarantees, that integrates indigenous knowledge systems and prioritize protection of vulnerable citizens. Number 15, advanced transparent rights-based environmental protection frameworks that address the harm of toxic pollution and unsustainable extractive practices, ensuring that regulatory standards are shaped by affected communities, prioritize ecological and public health, and do not entrench new forms of trade or development inequity. Number 16, prioritize public investment in value-adding green infrastructure. We want a fund for sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, and adaptation projects that promote local processing, benefits smallholder and indigenous livelihoods, and support the establishment of sustainability hubs for knowledge exchange, finance, and multi-sector partnership. Number 17, establish and strengthen South-South and North-South trade facilitation platforms to advance equitable market access, knowledge exchange, and regional value chain development. The fourth area that we have identified is on knowledge, technology, and cultural sovereignty, wherein we want the building of future-ready societies through decolonized knowledge and technology governance. This brings us to point number 18, which we are saying it's about publicly fund inclusive decolonized education system with systems with emphasis on equitable access for marginalized youth and learners with disabilities to STEM, science, technology, engineering, management, AI, and sustainability training, creating leadership pathways for technology governance and digital entrepreneurship, and affirming indigenous knowledge and local languages. Number 19, promote a preservation of historical memory, including diverse narratives of anti-colonial and anti-fascist resistance as a foundation for peace, pluralism, and international solidarity. Number 20, advanced technology governance rooted in community data ownership, inclusive AI standards, and legal protections against algorithmic bias. Number 21, establish a global artificial intelligence yearly assessment or IAR mechanism constituted through a multilateral civil society driven framework to monitor and certify ethical, environmental, and societal impacts for AI deployment across the G20 nations. Number 22, recognize cultural restitutions and heritage protections as a G20 commitment through ethical museum policy, reparation processes, and indigenous knowledge systems led cultural policy frameworks. Number 23, facilitate the development of a framework for international best practices for regenerative tourism that center community empowerment, cultural sustainability, and climate resilience, supported by knowledge sharing platforms and voluntary reporting on climate neutral community-led destinations. Number 24, establish a global indigenous knowledge system fund to strengthen indigenous health and local economies, backing innovation, cultural sovereignty, and resilient value chains that ensure fair measures and local employment. Number 25, invest in Global South research and development ecosystems with equitable access to public funding, open knowledge platforms, and science partnerships that respect sovereignty. Number 26, ensure that trade, finance, and climate agreement uphold national sovereignty and protect the cultural and historical identity of all peoples without discrimination. The last area we have identified is the area on rights, participation, and civic space, where we want guaranteed voice, safety, and power for all. This brings us to our recommendation number 27 that speaks to safeguard civic space and the rights of human, indigenous, and environmental defenders by ensuring that national security and public order laws are not misused to silence dissent or suppress democratic participation. Promote transparent legal standards and early response mechanisms to protect those at risk, grounded in the rule of law and aligned with national constitutions and international human rights commitments. Number 28, reject the use of unilateral economic sanctions not approved by the United Nations Security Council, given their disproportionate impact on civilians and their misuse as tools of coercion. Number 29, establish a permanent G20 gender equality task force with mandatory funded representation from women-led organizations. Number 30, reframe migration as a driver of shared prosperity by aligning legal pathways with labor market needs, embedding rights-based protections, and accelerating credential recognition and reducing remittance costs directed through global standards for displacement, including the Kampala Convention. Number 31, leverage sport for diplomacy and peace building. In this regard, we want investment in inclusive community-based sports programs that inspire hope, break down barriers, and build social cohesion, recognizing sports' unique ability to unite people and promote dignity, especially amongst the youth. We call on the G20 member states and the Sherpa process to recognize sport as a cross-cutting priority and include it in further G20 declarations. And lastly, recommendation number 32, strengthen global justice architecture through inclusive multilateral mechanisms that promote conflict mediation, human rights protection, and the rule of law. We encourage G20 engagement with impartial and internationally recognized frameworks that reinforce legitimacy and coherence of global governance. The future is not sustainable without justice. No one must be left behind. The question is not whether the G20 has been told, but whether they will act on the clear collective demands of the constituencies they serve. We also have legacy projects, and I need she needs to be ready as we now publicly put them together. put out this policy pack. The legacy projects that we have are three in the main. This process will enable us to build civil society South Africa. There is no apex platform for civil society in South Africa. 2 years ago, there was the social, the presidential social platform that was created. It directed that civil society must have a single body, and the C20 has advocated, it has brought 3,000, it has brought civil society organizations that were warring with each other into one family because we're united in what we can do. It is to build on that will result in us ensuring that civil society South Africa is given life as the part of our legacy going forward. The second one is to fulfill our Troika responsibilities to the C20 USA, as the G20 is going to the USA. In terms of this, there are three areas. We will participate in the leadership of the C20 USA as part of the Troika, the chairperson and the Sherpa and other members from South Africa, and others will continue with that particular responsibility so that we look at what was done in South Africa, what will be done in America, and what is going to be now happening at the next host, which will be the UK. We will also monitor the recommendations we have outlined. First, 22 and 23, the leaders are meeting. We want to hear what is it that they are going to say and whether our sentences are reflected in what they will be putting out there as their outcomes. In that regard, we would have something to take home. We will monitor those through our working groups to ensure that we continue to implement the things that we said needed to be done. Because some of those must be done in South Africa, but they must also be done in other countries. The third area around the Troika responsibilities is to contribution of the policy inputs into the development of C20 USA. It can't be that we are done and we are over. We have to continue with others. That's the second area of legacy. And the third and last one is on the use of sport as a tool for transformation. In this regard, we are working with a Department of Sports, Arts and Culture to look at the development of a framework for sport in the G20. The details of which will be the outcome of that particular process and its implementation. And we'll continue to further advocate for sport, the sport working group in following the G20 processes. So, Program Director, let me call on my colleague, Shanice, because I don't want to be accused of having sent this by email to the people that I prefer, but I want her to do it publicly. And over to you, Shanice, to now put our policy packs out in the public.
Hello, I have clicked publish and it is now on the page that I've linked into the chat.
Yeah, you can take us there to the website so that we can see you have published. Colleagues, when she says published, we had policy packs until 2024. Now, we want to see that you're talking the truth. We don't want the Matlanga Commission to ask questions to you in 20 years' time when the next G20 comes here to only find that you did not press publish. Over to you, Shanice. You can share.
Okay. I have to just update settings. Sorry, I didn't know I was going to share. So I need to reopen Zoom.
You have to go back and go out.
Yeah.
Please do so because this is an important part. As I was here, colleagues from Russia, colleagues from China, colleagues from many different countries, they say they want the policy briefs. I don't have time to be sending it to people on emails. I want them to go on our public platform.
Be back in a minute.
Okay. We just ask for your indulgence, colleagues. She's joined. She got out. Is Shini's back? She's back. Shini's, we're waiting for you to start to finish. Okay, take us through what you have done and then we get over and done with it. Okay, colleagues, that is the policy pack that includes this declaration I've just read, lock, stock, and barrel, the statements of intent that the persons with disability organized as D20 were reading, as well as the Q20 they were reading as statements of intent, and then the 14 policy briefs that Greer was summarizing. There's a chapter for each of those policy briefs that we basically have. Now it is public. Anyone who wants to accuse us of kowtowing to some interest and leaving others, that is your moment. We have now put everything that we have. We can go back, we can go home and sleep because our job is done. Although we will only finalize it when we go to that moment of the summit that the chairperson has spoken about from the 12th to the 14th of November. And we will take this into the G20 social summit process. We are happy that the 5 thematic areas at the G20 social summit that we as civil society are developing includes the 14 policy issues that we have come up with as C20. So we are going to influence others in that space to ensure that the issues that we have articulated find expression and they find a high place in that particular regard, so that when it is given to President Ramaphosa on the 20th at the G20 summit, which starts on the 18th to the 20th, we can now say, you see, he took what we have indicated with the collective of other engagement groups into the Leaders Summit, but it remains part and parcel of our work and part of our legacy. With that, thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Shepa. Now, or before I say this, my colleague Kineile has whispered in my ears to say there are no questions online. Therefore, I will just allow questions and then say Lerado, SABC, Ntokozo Newsroom, and then Mohammed Islam Radio. Any questions that you would like to pose to our speakers online and also directly to the Shepherd right here in the room? I could see from Mohammed sharp. He just gave me a non-verbal communication. Sharp. That's what he gave me. Also, Lerato gave me sharp. Please go ahead.
So, these two particular groups that we've seen some tensions when it comes to agreeing to the issues put down, one being the Y20 and then the C20. How do we ensure that the policy framework or the issues that we put on the table are actually continued with and everybody is on board? Particularly for the Global South, issues around civil society, around youth employment are extremely important issues for the Global South. So to ensure that we really do get this implementation once they are handed over and it goes back to the likes of the US that don't have the same issues as the Global South, please just expand a little bit on how we'll make sure that the work does take place on the ground?
No, thank you, ma'am, for that question. I would not want to venture to be the spokesperson of the Y20, but I was there when the Y20 had a summit. And my understanding is that there was a push for the institutionalization of the Y20 as a mechanism so that whatever declaration it comes up with, and they were the first engagement group within the engagement groups in the G20, they were saying that they no longer just want to put out communiques that are not going to be fulfilled through operationalization of them, because there was a break between the Y20 Brazil coming to Y20 South Africa. So when you look at Y20 Brazil, yeah, you have come up with a declaration, so what? And the so what is because there was no institutional platform to drive those processes. So what the South African Y20 colleagues and others were saying, we need to change the trajectory and ensure that part of the agreement of putting out the declaration that we have, and they did have a declaration, is that we must also agree that there must be the institutionalization of this mechanism. Because if it is not there, then we're just doing it for the cameras, and after that, there's no meaning about it. There was no agreement, there was no declaration that they basically came up with. It does not mean that they don't have issues that they have agreed on. There were many issues they agreed on. However, when it comes to C20, what we are now putting out there is a collective agreement of all of us, and also recognizing that only on the issue of LGBTQI, our colleagues from Russia and other countries that engaged with them as we were developing this document, we're saying we don't want the inclusion of the word LGBTQI. And for us in the negotiation is, it needs to be there. But to recognize that you don't want it, we will put a footnote to ensure that that which you object to and others is actually recorded. But I spoke about our legacy. What is it that we are going to do? We need to give over to the USA. We have agreed as the International Advisory Committee that we are not ready to do it at the summit next week, because we need to do a number of things to ensure that at C20 there is the institutionalization of the mechanism that we have. But in the absence of it, the issues that we have agreed should form part of our legacy. So the 14 working groups, we are going to be glued to the screens to look at what the leaders are saying as in relation to what we have said they need to do. Those things that they are agreeing with us, we will ensure we monitor their implementation, and where we need to participate, we will participate in those particular processes. But in those things that they may not have agreed from our end, we will ensure our Troika responsibilities to ensure that we push them through the USA process. We're expecting that it's not going to be an easy ride as well. President Trump this morning says we ought not to be a member of the G20 as South Africa. We have a different view to that. So it's going to be a bumpy road. It does not change us as civil society. It also requires us to even be much stronger and much closer and be united than we were, because the challenges we may experience around the G20 going in America, we must already create bridges, because the next G20 host is going to be Great Britain in 2027. So those things that we may not be able to achieve because of the political choices that the American government may make should enable us to already be forward thinking in terms of bringing them back into the agenda of the G20 2027. But in line with what you are saying, these things must not just be for the cameras. It must be implementation. Hence, the civil society South Africa as a mechanism that we will have to ensure that all these things that have been agreed, including our participation in the national dialogue, various organizations that participate in the C20 also are part of the national dialogue processes. We must also take them to that particular platform as well. So isikhathi sokudlala sesiphelile manje, because rekawfela, as the motto says, we must demonstrate that indeed we are together to ensure that we build a better world. There may be those people that occupy positions of power and authority in this world, but they won't occupy it forever. And those things that we can do without them, we must do without them.
When we talk about leaving no one behind, particularly in South Africa, a lot of people disengaged and not feeling as if this really speaks to them. Could you give us some insights on how, as C20, you've really engaged beyond engaging with the groups and civil society organizations, but how the engagement with average people on the ground in communities, what's that look like over the year?
Let me start it at two levels. The first one is what we have demonstrated, that if we're saying we have persons with disability, they are in leadership. Dr. Nzo, who unfortunately could not join us, and her statement on behalf of the G20, which is a platform created for persons with disability, was embraced within the G20, was given platform. When we're developing the policy positions, whilst the working groups would come with proposals, we will then take it to them as a platform and say, look at it and make your comments in terms of things that we may have left out. Because we can't just say, you must go and fight for them in the working groups. What if they were not actually looked at? The same was done for persons with disability as well, because for us it is inclusion. So they were also involved in the leadership. Roche is the second Sushepa. Dr. Nzo is the second deputy chairperson to Comrade Tulani, who is the chairperson. We also went into engaging with organizations. Over the 3,000 organizations that we have, just over 2,100 organizations that are in South Africa. They represent the lived realities and lived voices of communities that they represent, the services that they basically provide, policy proposals that they would want to see the South African government implementing. We did not allow the absence of resources to take us to every nook and cranny of the country through direct interaction to disable us from ensuring that we engage and we connect. Because we say technology divides us, but it also connects us. So we use technology as a platform to get those particular voices, because there were also engagements that were happening on the ground. Part of our journey going forward, as part of our legacy, is to go report back. And we hope to have the necessary resources to take us to all 9 provinces, working with these organizations, working with all role players, to ensure that not only are we reporting back, but we are saying, let's look at what we have said, what is it that we are doing, what is missing, what must then be done based on what we basically have said. And for that to happen, it's not a roadshow where Mabalani and the leadership go to all the 9 provinces. No, we already have the civil society leadership in all those 9 provinces. We will be investing in them, understanding what the issues we have collectively said are, and for them to champion those in their own languages based on the context that they also that they are operating in. If we are unable to do that, then this was just for the cameras. But we believe that we have enough gravitas and people in the 9 provinces of South Africa to be able to do so. Our colleagues from the rest of Africa were also part of that. Our working groups included colleagues that were coming from different countries of Africa, and they will be part of our summit next week. We also want them to champion these things within their countries, as well as our colleagues from the Global North and Global South. We all need to ensure that these things are not just about a moment, which is a summit. They are about making this a better world for all of us. So, to the best of our ability, we believe that with limited resources, we did what we could with what we have, where we are, and it has worked wonders for us. Moreover, because there were challenges around the legitimacy of the C20 leadership up until May, when there was mediation, when that process was finalized, we started this journey in June, and we have not slept. People have put in their technical knowledge, their lived experience to ensure that I'm able to sit here, Comrade Tulani is able to sit here, Greer is able to sit here and say, this is the product of the many voices that we have. And as I said when I started, whilst it is a product of the many voices that we have, despite the issues that we have clarified about the objections of the Russians, There were many other things that people wanted to have, and we agreed that let's take the best out of this that will take us to a better world in the fastest way possible. And those that are not part of this process, they are not codified. If they are implementable, let us continue to implement them and not just say, because I had a sentence or a paragraph is not there, I walk away from this process. We agree on 99% of the issues, and we must not break apart just because we don't agree on 1%. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shepa. And is there any question? Maybe to leaders online? If there is no question, let me see. It seems as there is no question, but feel free to have one-on-one interview with the Shepa. Have said so, this media briefing is officially adjourned. But because I've been brought up well, there are refreshments around the corner that we could just make sure that